The late summer air hung heavy with silence when the Army announced what no family ever wants to hear. Private Gregory, missing for nearly a year, would not be coming home alive. His remains were found in a shallow grave, just a few miles from his military base. For almost 12 long months, officials had insisted he was absent without leave, AWOL, branding him as a deserter, a soldier who had walked away from his duty. But when his body was unearthed in the cold earth of a wooded stretch just outside the installation, a chilling truth came to light. Gregory had never abandoned his post. He had been silenced. This is not just the story of a disappearance. It is a story of how a loyal soldier was erased from the ranks, dismissed as a runaway, and forgotten by the system meant to protect him. His car, left abandoned near the base, was a red flag ignored. His family's pleas dismissed as misplaced hope. And the year that passed before his remains were discovered raises the most haunting question of all. Who wanted him dead and why? Tonight, we peel back the layers of Private Gregory's vanishing, his final days, the military's controversial handling of the case, the disturbing discovery of his shallow grave, and the unanswered questions that still haunt investigators. This is a story of loyalty, betrayal, and a mystery that stretches far beyond one young man's fate. Before his name was reduced to a headline, before the word AWOL was stamped across his military record, Gregory was simply a young man with a future, born into a working-class family. He was a kind of son and brother who carried quiet pride in everything he did. Friends described him as dependable, the type of man who showed up early, stayed late, and rarely complained. When Gregory enlisted, it wasn't out of aimlessness. It was out of a sense of purpose. Like so many before him, he believed the Army would give him structure, discipline, and the chance to serve something larger than himself. He was just 43 weeks into his first active assignment when his name would become part of a much darker chapter. At the base, Gregory quickly became known for his work ethic. Supervisors noted that while he wasn't the loudest in the room, he was steady, meticulous, and eager to learn. Off duty, he called home often, telling his family about the routine, the friendships, and sometimes the stresses of military life. And yet, beneath the ordinary rhythms of training and duty, there were hints of unease. Some soldiers later recalled Gregory seemed distracted in the days before he disappeared. Others suggested he had become wary, careful in conversations, as if something or someone was weighing heavily on his mind. Then came the day that would mark the beginning of the mystery. Gregory vanished, leaving behind his car near the base. For the Army, the explanation was immediate. He had walked away. But for those who knew him best, that didn't make sense, because Gregory wasn't just a soldier. He was a son, a friend, and a man who never ran from responsibility. It was an ordinary morning on base. Gregory was seen by fellow soldiers. Nothing out of the ordinary in his behavior. Nothing to suggest he was about to walk away from the life he had committed himself to. By mid-afternoon, however, Gregory was gone. His car, a dependable vehicle he drove to and from the base, was discovered abandoned just a few miles away. There were no signs of struggle inside. The keys weren't left in the ignition. It looked, at first glance, as though he had simply parked and walked away. When Gregory failed to return to duty, military officials quickly made a determination that would shape the rest of the case. They labeled him AWOL, absent without leave. It's a designation used for soldiers who desert their posts without authorization. To the Army, this was a neat, bureaucratic explanation. A soldier disappeared? He must have chosen to leave. Case closed. But for Gregory's family, that conclusion was not only wrong, it was deeply insulting. This was not the man they knew. Gregory had never been a flight risk. He was proud of his service, loyal to his commitments, and above all else, he valued his integrity. To assume he had simply abandoned everything without a word didn't align with the son, the brother, or the soldier they knew. Despite their pleas for a deeper investigation, the AWOL label meant something devastating. Resources were limited. Searches weren't launched with urgency. Local law enforcement deferred to the Army. And crucial early hours, the moments that matter most in missing persons cases, slipped away forever. And so, for nearly a year, the official record stood. Gregory was AWOL, a soldier who had walked away, a man who had chosen to vanish. But the truth was much darker. because just miles from where his car was abandoned, Gregory had never left at all. Almost a year after Gregory vanished, the silence finally broke. In a wooded patch of land not far from the base, just miles from where his abandoned car had been left, a shallow grave was discovered. Inside were human remains, later confirmed through forensic testing to be Gregory's. The location itself was chilling. This was not some distant corner of the country where he might have fled. This was home territory, close to the very place where his life revolved, and close to where investigators had originally dismissed his case. It raised an agonizing question. How could his body have lain there for nearly a year without being found? The grave was shallow, hastily dug, suggesting panic or urgency. Whoever put Gregory there hadn't taken the time to cover their tracks carefully. And yet, despite this, nearly 12 months passed before the truth came to light. For his family, the discovery was crushing. They had clung to the hope that Gregory was alive somewhere, perhaps struggling but surviving. Now that hope was extinguished. In its place came a storm of grief and anger. Because if Gregory had been killed, then someone had hidden that truth behind a convenient label of AWOL. To them, it felt like betrayal. Not only had their son been taken from them, but the very institution he served had failed him, both in life and in death. The Army now faced the uncomfortable truth. Gregory hadn't abandoned his post. He had been murdered, but the discovery of his remains was not the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. Because despite finding his body, the question remained unanswered. Who killed him and why? When Gregory's remains were recovered from the shallow grave, the next step was critical: the autopsy. If his killer had hoped that time and the elements would erase the evidence, they were wrong. Forensic science, even working with decomposed remains, could still tell a story. The pathologist began by examining the skeletal remains. Early reports noted trauma consistent with violence. The shallow grave suggested concealment, not an accident. Gregory hadn't wandered into the woods and collapsed. Someone had deliberately placed him there. Fragments of clothing were still present. Military-style garments that identified him almost as much as his DNA would later confirm. His shoes, oddly, were missing, an unsettling detail that raised speculation. Had they been taken as a trophy? Or was it a sign of staging, an attempt to confuse investigators? The condition of the grave itself told experts another truth. It was dug quickly, with minimal effort. That suggested the killer feared being caught. It was not the work of someone with time to plan. For Gregory's family, the autopsy findings were like reopening the wound all over again. They had long been told he was AWOL, gone by choice. But the evidence now told the opposite story. Gregory's death was a result of foul play. He had not abandoned his duty. He had been silenced. Yet, despite these revelations, authorities were reluctant to share full details of the autopsy with the public. Certain facts were kept sealed, perhaps to protect the investigation, perhaps to avoid embarrassment. What leaked out, however, pointed squarely toward homicide. And so, the question loomed larger. If Gregory had been murdered, who had the motive? And how had his death gone unnoticed for so long, right under the shadow of the base? The autopsy confirmed the crime. Now, the search for a killer would begin. With Gregory's autopsy confirming foul play, investigators should have had momentum. Instead, what they encountered was silence. Thick, impenetrable, and deeply suspicious. From the very beginning, Army officials were guarded. The initial decision to label Gregory as AWOL now cast a long shadow. If he had been marked as a deserter, who had bothered to truly search for him? Did this mistake, or deliberate choice, cost Gregory his chance at justice? Local law enforcement expressed frustration behind closed doors. Some detectives claimed their hands were tied. Others whispered that jurisdictional disputes between civilian authorities and the Army stalled progress. The Army, for its part, insisted it follow procedure, but those words rang hollow to Gregory's grieving family. Even within the base, a wall had gone up. Soldiers who had once shared cigarettes and stories with Gregory now claimed they remembered little. He kept to himself, some said. He was struggling, others added vaguely. But the details were thin and the hesitations obvious. It felt as though someone, or something, was keeping lips sealed. Family members pressed for answers. They wanted transparency, but instead received carefully worded statements, polished and vague. The Army maintained its official line. Gregory had been AWOL until the discovery of his body proved otherwise. But by then, nearly a year had passed, and vital leads had gone cold. Journalists who tried to probe deeper encountered similar resistance. Phone calls went unreturned. Freedom of information requests were delayed or denied. When questions turned toward possible conflicts inside the base, doors slammed shut entirely. And yet, through the silence, a chilling possibility emerged. Gregory may not have been the only one. Rumors swirled of other soldiers who had gone missing, or who had died under suspicious circumstances. Their cases quietly brushed aside. For Gregory's family, the silence wasn't just frustrating. It was infuriating. They had lost a son, a brother, a soldier. And now, it seemed, they were also losing the truth. The case was stalled, but whispers persisted. Some pointed to conflicts Gregory had within the ranks. Others suggested he may have uncovered something someone wanted buried with him. The wall of silence was growing higher. But if investigators could find even one crack, it might lead them to the person who had placed Gregory in that shallow grave. When the silence from officials became deafening, others began to fill in the gaps with theories. Some were grounded in logic, others in whispers and rumor, but all carried the weight of possibility. Theory 1. Internal conflict. Some investigators and fellow soldiers suggested Gregory had clashed with others on base. Perhaps he saw or heard something he wasn't supposed to. Perhaps a dispute escalated, and someone decided the easiest way to silence him was permanent. His car abandoned near the base hinted that whoever was involved knew the area well. Theory 2. Wrong place, wrong time. Others believe Gregory may have stumbled into danger outside the base. He could have witnessed a crime or crossed paths with someone dangerous. But if that were the case, why was his body found so close to the base itself? Why would his killers take the risk of leaving him essentially on the Army's doorstep? Theory 3. Institutional cover-up. For Gregory's family, one theory became harder to ignore. If the Army had labeled him AWOL so quickly, could it have been deliberate? Was it easier to tarnish his record than to admit something darker had happened within the ranks? Cover-ups weren't new to military history. There were precedents where inconvenient truths had been buried to preserve reputation. The idea wasn't paranoia. It was fear born of experience. Gregory's family had been met with half-truths, delays, and carefully worded statements. Each stonewall only fueled suspicion that the Army was protecting its own. Theory 4. A targeted killing. Then there were the whispers no one wanted to believe, that Gregory had been specifically targeted. Maybe he knew something about drugs, weapons, or corruption on base. Maybe his death wasn't random at all, but message to others who might dare speak out. For every theory, there were holes. For every suspicion, a lack of evidence. But together, they painted a chilling picture. Gregory's disappearance and murder weren't just a tragedy. They might have been part of something far bigger. One fact remained. The young soldier who had once walked those barracks with a future ahead of him had been reduced to a shallow grave. And nearly a year of lost time had all but erased a trail to his killer. Theories swirled, but answers did not. And as the months dragged on, Gregory's case risked becoming what too many already feared. Another unsolved story buried in the shadows of military silence. For Gregory's family, grief quickly transformed into determination. They were no longer just mourning parents and siblings. They were advocates, investigators, and warriors in their own right. If the Army wasn't a fight for Gregory, then they would. At first, their questions were simple. Why had Gregory been labeled AWOL so quickly? Why weren't search efforts stronger, given the proximity of his car? And most importantly, why did it take nearly a year to find his remains just miles from base? The answers, when they came at all, were vague and unsatisfying. The Army insisted protocol had been followed. Officials emphasized how difficult it is to track missing soldiers who voluntarily walk off base. Yet Gregory's family knew their son and brother. He hadn't walked off. He hadn't simply abandoned his duties, his life, or his loved ones. So they pushed harder. They contacted reporters, raised awareness, and told Gregory's story every chance they got. Local news stations began to take notice, covering the case with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Advocacy groups who specialize in military justice reform stepped in, lending their voices to amplify the family's cries for accountability. One sibling was quoted in a televised interview, voice trembling but unshaken. "They said my brother was a deserter, but Gregory didn't desert. Gregory was deserted by the very institution that promised to protect him." It was a gut punch, not just to viewers, but to the reputation of the Army itself. Behind the scenes, the family filed repeated requests for information through the Freedom of Information Act, demanding access to Gregory's service records, investigative notes, and any findings related to his disappearance and death. Many requests were denied. Some documents arrived heavily redacted, black bars blotting out entire sections of text. Each denial only fueled their fire. But beyond legal filings and press appearances, there was also the quiet, unshakable grief. Gregory's parents kept his room as it had been, a haunting reminder of the life cut short. Holidays were marked not by celebration, but by absence. And the shallow grave where Gregory's body had been found became both a place of mourning and a battlefield, a constant reminder that justice had not yet been won. The family's persistence wasn't just about Gregory. It became about every soldier who had vanished into silence, every family left without answers, every name that had been written off as AWOL, when in reality, the truth was far darker. The fight for Gregory was personal, but it was also bigger than him. It was about breaking through the wall of secrecy and ensuring no one else would be abandoned the way he had been. Even though Gregory's case remains unsolved, several haunting clues continue to gnaw at investigators, journalists, and true crime researchers. Each one points toward a mystery that refuses to be buried. First, the location of Gregory's remains. He was found in a shallow grave, just a few miles from base. Not in another state, not across the country, but right there within reach. How could a full year pass with search teams, cadaver dogs, and aerial sweeps, and yet his body went undiscovered until long after hope had begun to fade? Second, the car. His vehicle was abandoned nearby, parked as though left in a hurry. Nothing about it indicated that Gregory had planned a new life somewhere else. His wallet, personal items, and Army gear were missing or unaccounted for, but the car stood as a silent witness. Who drove it there? Did Gregory leave it willingly, or was it staged to mislead investigators? Third, the shallow grave itself. It wasn't the work of nature. Someone put Gregory there. That fact alone rules out the Army's early insistence that he simply vanished of his own accord. The presence of a grave indicates intent. It suggests murder, concealment, and someone close enough to the base to hide a body so dangerously near military grounds. Then there's the most unsettling question of all. Was Gregory killed by someone inside his own circle, possibly even on base? Some whispers within the military community suggested disputes, debts, or dangerous knowledge Gregory might have stumbled upon. Others hinted at hazing rituals gone wrong or retaliation from someone who wanted silence. None of these theories were proven, but each carries the same chilling weight. Gregory didn't leave by choice. What haunts investigators most is not just what was found, but what was never explained. Why did it take so long for officials to admit foul play? Why was Gregory's family treated like an inconvenience rather than partners in the search? And why, to this day, does the Army remain tight-lipped about what they truly know? The shallow grave and the abandoned car remain the loudest evidence in this case. But until someone steps forward or until the truth is forced into light, there are also monuments to silence. The story of Private Gregory is not just a mystery. It is an indictment of silence, neglect, and unanswered questions. When he vanished, the Army was quick to label him AWOL. That one word carried devastating weight. It shifted the narrative from a soldier in danger to a soldier accused of abandoning his duty. It meant his disappearance was not treated with the urgency it deserved. It meant valuable time was lost. And it meant his family endured months of not just grief, but stigma. Yet when his body was found in a shallow grave, just miles from base, that narrative collapsed. Gregory had not run. He had not deserted. He had been silenced. And someone had buried him as though he were nothing more than a secret to be hidden. For Gregory's family, The discovery brought no closure, only more questions. Who killed their son? Why? And perhaps most painful of all, how could the very institution he swore to serve and protect have failed him so completely? Even today, the Army maintains that the case is unsolved. They have released little information to the public. No arrests have been made. No suspects officially named. His killer or killers remain at large. But Gregory's legacy cannot be erased. His story lives on in whispers through military circles, in newspaper archives, and in the hearts of families who know too well what it feels like to have a loved one vanish under circumstances that never add up. Some call it a tragedy. Others call it a cover-up. But no matter the label, the truth is undeniable. A soldier trusted to defend his country was left defenseless by the very system meant to protect him. And so, Gregory's case remains both a wound and a warning. A wound for his family, who never received justice, and a warning to us all about the danger of assumptions, the cost of silence, and the shadows that can fall over even the most disciplined of institutions. Until the day someone comes forward with the truth, until the day justice is finally done, the shallow grave near that base is not just where Gregory rests. It is where trust was buried too. This is not the end of his story. It is the beginning of a question that still demands an answer. Who killed Private Gregory?